Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Highlands at Pittsford, an independent and assisted living community affiliated with the University of Rochester, offering cottage and apartment homes, daily life enrichment activities, and care assistance as needed. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, our connection this hour was made over this past frenetic weekend when President Trump launched a trade war against the United States' North American neighbors. The president imposed new tariffs, or said they were going to roll out on Tuesday, 25%, a level that had an immediate impact on business and relationships. President Trump has said that the tariffs are necessary for several reasons. First, he says that the United States has been running a trade deficit for too long with our neighbors. That's why he included China in the new tariffs, although at a lower level. The second reason is that Trump says the United States has been victimized by porous borders to the south and north, with drugs and undocumented immigrants flowing in. Canadian leaders responded that if there's anything flowing at dangerous levels, it's American guns heading north. On Truth Social, Trump wrote that Canada will lose this trade war, and their best move would be to agree to become the 51st American state, which would eliminate the need for tariffs. Here's some of what President Trump said to reporters this weekend.
Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years. They don't allow our banks. Did you know that? Canada does not allow banks to go in. If you think about it, that's pretty amazing. If we have a U.S. bank, they don't allow them to go in. Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street. We subsidize Canada by the tune of about $200 billion a year. And for what? What do we get out of it? We don't get anything out of it.
We don't get anything out of it, he said. Well, for Canada, it's been a rare moment of political unity, with outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offering a solemn but firm statement of Canada's plan to retaliate, followed by similar comments from Conservative Canadian leader and possible next Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre. Here's part of what Trudeau said this weekend.
I want to speak directly to Americans, our closest friends and neighbors. This is a choice that, yes, will harm Canadians, but beyond that, it will have real consequences for you, the American people. As I have consistently said, tariffs against Canada will put your jobs at risk, potentially shutting down American auto assembly plants and other manufacturing facilities.
That's Prime Minister Trudeau, who also said that their tariffs will include 25% across several hundreds of billions of dollars in American goods, and we're going to talk about that coming up, about the possible impact. Now I want to listen to some of what the Conservative leader in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, said yesterday.
Conservatives condemn President Trump's massive, unjust, and unjustified tariffs, which will damage both American and Canadian economies. There is no justification whatsoever for these tariffs or this treatment. Canada will never be the 51st state. We are an independent, proud, and strong nation.
And at hockey games in Canada over the weekend, the American national anthem was raucously booed. Meanwhile, the leadership in Mexico announced their own plan to retaliate with economic sanctions against the United States. But then, just a couple of hours ago, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average down about 500 points, President Trump called Claudia Sheinbaum, the leader of Mexico, and the leaders agreed to pause the new tariffs by about a month. That seemed to stabilize the stock market. Trump says that Mexico is now promising to send 10,000 troops to help police the border with the United States. That is something that Mexico also did back in 2021, and it did not have a dramatic effect on border crossings, but Trump says this is a victory in his trade war on day one. Meanwhile, stock markets in Asia and Europe fell on fears of a prolonged trade war and a business slowdown. President Trump has said there could be some short-term economic pain, but he thinks Americans will understand the need for it in the long run. He reaffirmed his intention to pursue taking over Greenland as well. And today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio Rubio is in Panama with eyes on the canal. Well, the speed of all of this escalation has surprised many people, especially in Canada. We're going to talk about that this hour with our guests. In studio with me is Dr. Amit Badapial, who is a distinguished professor and the Arthur J. Gosnell Professor of Economics at RIT. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for being with us here.
Thank you for having me.
On the line, let me welcome two guests from Canada. Dr. Mario Elia is a family physician based in London, Ontario, and an adjunct professor in the Department of Family Medicine at Western University. Dr. Elia, welcome back to the program.
Great to be here.
And welcome to Dr. Norm Friesen. Norm is a professor of education living in Canada. Norm, thank you for making time for us.
Oh, you're most welcome.
I'm just going to start with the Canadian guests and just ask you what sort of the last 24 hours has been like. And Dr. Elia, I know you are a big hockey fan. I saw lots of video of national anthems, and it's been an ugly sort of weekend for the American national anthem in Canada. But is that representative of what you are hearing and feeling, or is that overblown?
No, it's always interesting. You always wonder whether what we are seeing on social media is actually a reflection of what's happening kind of beyond social media in society. And I think what you heard in those arenas over the weekend is a pretty accurate reflection of how Canadians are feeling. And to hear the anthem booed, I don't recall that ever happening, even at, international events. World Junior Hockey Championships, despite there being kind of a fierce rivalry between the two nations, an outright booing is something you won't often hear. And as loud as it was in Ottawa, I'm not sure if anyone saw the game, the Raptors anthem from last night, more booing. So I think we can talk about it too. Accurate reflection of how Canadians are feeling for sure.
Well, and Mario, I'm also curious to know about sort of this political moment because, Americans who aren't following Canadian politics closely, they might be vaguely aware that Prime Minister Trudeau is planning to step down. His popularity ratings have fallen. And Pierre Poilievre, who is a possible successor, doesn't have much nice to say about Justin Trudeau, but their statements were pretty similar. It looks like there is some alignment here. Has this galvanized Canadians across political boundaries?
I think absolutely it has. Over the last number of months, even last couple of years, there's kind of been a question as to is there some sense of disunity within Canada? A lot of it brought on by COVID restrictions, a lot of brought on by kind of our national politics. And there has been kind of an underlying question of, is that idea of being Canadian, that unity, kind of being at risk, for lack of a better term, and issues around immigration and issues around our criminal justice system here in Canada, and seemingly over the course of 40 to 72 hours here. I have not seen this element of patriotism in my lifetime, and even talking to older patients of mine. Even this morning, we had a few conversations. They haven't seen anything like this since Canada played Russia in the 1972 Summit Series. In terms of people being fiercely proud of their country, fiercely ready to defend, do whatever is possible. This morning, I already saw little flags at the grocery store. Advertising Canadian products. So this is all people are talking about, for lack of a better term up here, because the idea of having your sovereignty as a nation questioned, the idea of knowing that our economy will suffer as a result of these, and friends and family will lose their jobs potentially, depending on their sector. Patients of mine are going to be in financial straits potentially. This has everyone's attention and everyone's fury, and President Trump wasn't entirely a popular individual up in Canada. Approval rating, I think, was 20% positive, and that was back in January. Can't imagine that's improved much. But it's uniform up here, and even those who may have supported Trump, there are Canadians who had favorable views towards Trump previously. They certainly aren't advertising those positive views today.
Well, Professor Friesen, does this mean that Canada is not going to agree to become the 51st state after all?
Well, I just want to start by saying that I acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional lands of multiple First Nations here in British Columbia, including the Musqueam and Salish nations. And so I just wanted to insert into this discussion the idea that the question of sovereignty in Canada is actually fairly complicated, and that there's a number of different nations in Canada, in a sense, including Quebec as a distinct society with their own National Assembly and, of course, many First Nations. So it's not even up to necessarily me or other people, that my friends, for example, to say. It's up to like a wide range of different interest groups and stakeholders who are, in a sense, members of sovereign Canada.
And Norm, just briefly, do you want to elaborate on some of the points that Mario has made about what the kind of this cultural moment is like in Canada?
Yeah, one's attempted to give different comparisons, and I think maybe one comparison could be to the 1995 referendum that almost saw Quebec cede from Canada. And I think that one of the things that happened there was both, sort of corporate Canada and English-speaking Canada all being on exactly the same page and very adamant about the need for national unity. In some ways, what's happening now, though, is, of course, we've been provided with motivation by our southern neighbor. So I think in some ways you could say that it does have a positive side insofar as unity has been something that's been lacking in Canada for the last since COVID, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. Let me turn to the economic side of this. And Dr. Badabiel, when we look at tariffs in general, first of all, one of the questions I had for the professor for the program was, is there a case for tariffs? And the answer that you gave was yes, but maybe not this. I'm going to give you some space to talk about what you're seeing here and what tariffs are typically used to do.
Yeah, so the economic theory is pretty clear, and it distinguishes between small countries and large countries. So a small country is one that cannot influence world prices with its own actions. So if you're a small country, there is never a case for a tariff. So the U.S. is not a small country. It's a large country. So it has market power in some markets. So the question is, for a large country like the U.S., is there a case that one can make for a so-called tariff? And the answer is, again, yes, a so-called optimal tariff, but in a very narrow range of circumstances. And typically excluded from this analysis is the question of retaliation. What do you do when the trade partner or partners against whom you're levying tariffs retaliate with their own tariffs? Then it's basically a free-for-all. The only thing that I will say is that because President Trump is inheriting a relatively strong American economy, particularly relative to many other parts of the world, it is possible that with tariffs, and if a tariff war ensues for a reasonably prolonged period of time, that the United States will lose, as will its trading partners, but that the U.S. will lose by less. That's the only possible.
Is that a win?
No, absolutely not.
That's not a win?
No, well, from President Trump's perspective, it's probably a win, but no. You're both losing.
Okay. And you heard in the remarks that we played at the outset of this program, the president said to reporters, we subsidize Canada, and what do we get for it? We don't get anything out of that relationship with them. What do we get for it? What do you make of that?
That's a bogus argument. I mean, we don't subsidize Canada, and we get a lot from Canada. Let's just focus on one thing. That's energy. Midwestern states, several of them, so-called swing states, which he won in the most recent election, many of those Midwestern state folks there get their energy from Canadian sources. Now, Canadian energy coming into the United States is going to be, a tariff is going to be levied on it. Granted, not 25%, but 10%, but that's still going to hurt.
We've been getting energy from Canada at a discount.
Yeah.
And perhaps not anymore.
No, it's going to cost more, but the only silver lining, to the extent one can refer to this as a silver lining, is that the tariff is going to be 10% on energy imports as opposed to 25%. But it really doesn't make any sense.
I want to listen to a couple of things and get the professor's take, and then we're going to open it up, listeners. If you want to join the conversation about this, you heard Dr. Elias say in Ontario, it's all anybody's talking about. Americans are talking about this too. This has really shaken people up in the last 48 hours here. First, I want to listen to some remarks that were made last week before this really erupted into an actual tariff war from another conservative leader in Canada, the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who was speaking on a program, and he was talking about what Dr. Badabiel just talked about. Energy, the flow of energy, he's concerned, Harper was concerned that Trump was ignoring the fact that a lot of American guns end up going over the border into Canada. He said that in terms of the actual flow of migration and drugs, it is a minuscule percentage that goes into the United States from Canada. Essentially, Harper is saying Trump is very badly informed here. And Harper is someone who, I don't know if he's predisposed to be close with Trump, but he's certainly closer politically to Trump than the current leadership. I want to listen to some of what Harper said.
Many things he's saying. Even when you talk about migrants, first of all, there's no major migrant flow from Canada to the United States. And I'm going to tell you right now, drugs, guns, crime, most of those things flow north, not south. A lot more flows into Canada from the United States than flows out of it. So, I have a real problem with some of the things Donald Trump is saying. It doesn't sound to me like the pronouncements of somebody, I say, wants a better deal or whatever, fine. But it doesn't sound to me like the pronouncements of somebody who's a friend, a partner, and an ally.
All right, that's Stephen Harper, the former prime minister. What do you make of that, Amit?
I think he's generally on target. This is not the way in which you behave. This is not the way in which you treat your allies. In fact, some of your closest allies. Remember, Canada is a member of the so-called Five Eyes Security Alliance. If his concern is about national security, you're just, unnecessarily irritating and even insulting one of your closest allies. I don't see how that makes any sense.
When it comes to what is happening in the last couple of hours with Mexico, I mentioned that the Mexican leadership had a call with President Trump this morning. President Trump said it was a very friendly call, and the White House agreed that the Mexican tariffs are going to be delayed a month. Now, with Canada, he said there's no deal to delay. There's another call with Prime Minister Trudeau this afternoon, but there's less of an indication there could be a delay. With Mexico, you get this month-long delay, and President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico says, okay, we'll put 10,000 troops at the border, which Mexico did 4 years ago. That's not a brand new move, but they're saying we're going to do that. And now the White House is saying, look, we've already got our first victory in the trade war here. It's day one. We're going to pause it with Mexico, and they're going to add troops, and we're going to make the border safer. Look at what our tariffs are doing, Professor. They're winning. What do you say?
Well, I say that's comparing and mixing apples with oranges. There is a security issue at the southern border that's clearly...
Everyone's acknowledged it.
Yes, and there have been significant attempts to address it. But the way in which you address it is not by slapping tariffs, which hurts ultimately American consumers. And the troop surge that you're talking about, as you just pointed out, a similar surge did occur a couple of years ago. To the best of my knowledge, it didn't have much of an impact in terms of reducing flows across the border.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. I don't know that it had. Certainly, we're not sitting here 4 years later talking about a closed or secured border. So, and I can't predict what's going to happen at the southern border. Again, that's not my expertise. We'll have to see what this new Mexican troop surge will do there. But Dr. Badabiel, the president, had said throughout this campaign, and frankly, he said 8 years ago, he doesn't like the way our trade is working out with China, with Mexico, with other countries. And he has been talking about tariffs for a long time. This is the culmination of something that he has sort of telegraphed for a long time. Is there a case that we need to be tougher on Mexico?
Well, we need to be tougher on Mexico, not for trade-related reasons. We need to be tougher on Mexico as a security concern, of which illegal immigration is a part. There is no question that problem, illegal immigration, needs to be dealt with. China is a completely different kettle of fish. They are a major problem. There's no question about that. And dealing with China requires a comprehensive, multilateral approach, including the help of allies, which is exactly what he's not doing by levying tariffs on Canada in this particular case. And we need Canadian help, along with the help of our EU partners.
One other point on China before I turn back to our guests who are joining us from Canada this hour. And listeners, we'll take some more of your feedback as well at 844-295-TALK. It's 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994, or email the program connections@WXXI.org. At the outset, you said, if you're a small fish in the sea, there's not really a case for tariffs.
Correct.
China is the biggest fish. There's big fish and there's China. I want to believe, as an American citizen, that this administration is very well thought out how they're going to approach China, because China has a lot of economic power too. They have different levers they can pull.
Correct.
But they have a trade imbalance that they benefit from. And I think the Trump administration would say, look, we're going to hit them where it hurts because they want our business. They're benefiting from a disproportionate set of business, and we have the leverage here. Is that true?
It is true that we have leverage, but then so do they. And the question is, it's unclear what would happen if there were a tit-for-tat tariff war between the United States and China, particularly if it were for a prolonged period of time. The sad fact is, because of a certain amount of historical events in which we've played a major role in enabling China's rise, we have to recognize today that it's the second largest economy of the world, by some counts, maybe even the largest, and you cannot just bully them into submission. If you really want to address the problems that China has with the United States and more generally with the Western world, you need a coordinated multilateral approach. You can't just do it unilaterally.
This morning, I had a chance to have a brief phone conversation with someone from the Finger Lakes wine industry who had a contract canceled essentially overnight. And he's not alone. So I want to listen to some of the comments that were made in this conversation by Chad Hendrickson. Chad is the brand ambassador for Lakewood Vineyards. That's on Seneca Lake. And what you're going to hear from Chad is a rapidly changing scene for American producers, especially here in our region, New York wine and spirits. It is rapidly changing literally overnight. There are stores, you heard Dr. Elias say that there's Canadian flags on Canadian products in the grocery store, and there's an emphasis in liquor stores on, buy Canadian, but we're actually seeing contracts cancel overnight. This is some of my conversation with Chad Hendrickson from Lakewood.
Thanks for having me.
So let me just start by asking you this, Chad. What has been the immediate impact of this news over the weekend on your company, your business?
Well, Lakewood recently agreed to join the export program that's facilitated through the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, supported by the USDA, to get our wines abroad and also get our wines into Canada. And, a 25% tariff makes us essentially a non-starter. We're looking forward to a nice addition to our sales going into Canada. We have a ton of Canadian guests that come down and try wines in-house. And to have them, local for them was a big boon for us, and that's essentially gone.
This deal that you're talking about that's gone, you finished the deal, just a few months ago? Is that right?
Just a few weeks ago.
Just a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
And so is it your understanding that overnight it's canceled?
Yeah, I just got a text from a friend that's in the industry as well, that Doug Ford essentially said that the Liquor Control Board for Ontario is removing all American alcoholic products from the shelves. So there is no deal now. We are done. And, it's going to affect all the Finger Lakes producers that are in Canada, but really all alcohol producers across the United States. It's a real big deal. I think that we see challenges in this industry all the time. Alcohol sales have been down. Wine sales specifically have been down in the United States. So, any opportunity for us to grow as a company, but grow as a region as well, is important to us. Moreover, we've always had a very friendly relationship with our neighbors to the north here in the Finger Lakes. We're always excited to see them here. It's frustrating, to be quite frank. We would like to see that relationship grow and not be damaged. And I'm not really sure how we're going to recover from this.
You talk about the region-wide and, frankly, the nationwide impact of this set of tariffs, and yeah. I think that's well taken. But for Lakewood individually, how significant a loss is this?
I can't really say because we're not at the point of having a broad distribution, right? But the potential was there, and lost potential to me is the lost sale. We could have probably ran through 120 cases of wine, hopefully immediately, and seen our sales grow from there. That's speculation. The reality is there are other wineries that have placement now on shelf, and that's a huge blow to them. So I do talk regionally because that's something that I think that we Finger Lakes producers do often, and we're proud to do that. But individually, it's going to be, any loss is a blow.
That's Chad Hendrickson from Lakewood Vineyards on Seneca Lake joining us this morning to tell us about how quickly things are moving. And Dr. Badapiel said what that says to me is there's a lot of talk about economic theory, and then there's reality, and reality is moving pretty quick here. Any surprise there?
No. I think the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is justified in feeling peeved because just a couple of weeks ago he made a trip to Mar-a-Lago to have a conversation with President Trump. And I think as a result of that conversation, he probably felt, okay, I've dealt with the worst of things and we now have an understanding, at least an implicit one, that nothing draconian is going to be done with the Canadian economy. And then fast forward just a couple of weeks, and here is Trump with 25% tariffs on one of our closest allies. So he must be legitimately upset that I thought I had some implicit agreements with the new American president, but no, reality is a little different. And things are moving very quickly.
But he was prepared to retaliate.
Yes.
He was very specific about that. We shouldn't be surprised about that.
No. Why? We should not be surprised at all. I mean, why would any self-respecting country, particularly an ally of ours, our neighbor, in fact, do nothing and just sit tight saying, okay, walk all over
a doormat.
me.
Yeah, we're
exactly.
a doormat.
Walk all over me. We're a doormat. It's not going to happen. So he's retaliating. And the only thing is we don't know how long this is going to last because, Trump may do something and then claim victory even if he's accomplished nothing. But if it's prolonged, then there are going to be major damaging impacts on consumers, amongst other groups on both sides of the 49th parallel.
To our Canadian guest here, Dr. Mario Elia, is there support, as far as you can tell, is there a feeling that, hey, this is going to be painful, but what Prime Minister Trudeau said about the retaliatory tariffs, that has to happen, that you can't take this lying down, and that Canada's going to try to punch back even if it hurts?
I think so, and I think there's large support for that, right? Your guest earlier had mentioned the move that Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, made in terms of so our liquor here in the province of Ontario goes through the Liquor Control Board. So over the weekend, he made an announcement that as of tomorrow, all American alcohol would be essentially banned from the liquor. So they wouldn't be purchasing any American alcohol through the LCBO. That's essentially all of the alcohol that flows through Ontario. Just complete stop. And I'll admit, when I saw that tweet, I gave a bit of a fist pump because that to me seems like a logical step that we need to take. Hearing that conversation and knowing that it's going to have a negative effect on someone's livelihood in the U.S. is not, that's really hard to hear. That the needless negative impact that this entire situation is going to have on some Americans, but we don't have many cards to play here. We're dealing with the largest economy in the world, an individual making the decisions for whom we can't necessarily trust day to day, or is going to be consistent logically or otherwise, and not knowing how to necessarily pull those levers. And again, alcohol is one where, again, provincially run. That's one where he can make an impact. There were another announcement today from Doug Ford that any contracts that the province of Ontario is putting out to tender, that American companies would not be allowed to vie for those, and those contracts yearly are in the billions. And announcing that the province's contract with Starlink interest. So here's another way of getting to the president. That he was ripping up the contract with Starlink. Now, what does ripping up mean? I have no idea. We have a habit in the province of Ontario of ripping up contracts and still needing to pay them out. So I'm not sure that will have an impact in the president's inner circle. But again, is there support for these things? I think by and large, yes. Politically, it's a very interesting time in Canada. We're in the province of Ontario here. We are now in the midst of what will be a month and a half long election campaign. So you've got parties that are now, as much as I would love healthcare and kind of other social issues to be on the top of mind when it comes to our election campaign, no one cares about healthcare right now. This is strictly a campaign being fought on the economy. And again, on the federal level, we were going in the direction of a massive election win for the federal Conservatives whenever the next election will be on a federal level. Seemingly over the last 2 weeks, that has flipped on its. I did not see that happening through any mechanism. This seemed like a done deal, but suddenly the incumbent Liberal Party now is making some inroads in Ontario. So there's all of that playing in the background too, where you have now politicians here who are going to take a nationalistic stance, who are not going to necessarily, want to give in and be seen as given in. There's an opportunity here for them as well. So a lot of kind of interesting dynamics here at play.
Norm, Professor Friesen, what do you think? What do you want Canada to do about this? I mean, are you in support of what Prime Minister Trudeau and his team have done in terms of retaliation?
Oh yeah, personally, I'm in support. I think a lot of people are supportive. I mean, one of the things that, though, I just wanted to mention that make this particularly frustrating for Canadians, I think, really motivate them more to support what Trudeau is doing is just the fact that Trump has mentioned any number of reasons for these tariffs and for his initial tariffs, and border crossings, fentanyl, which is minor, as Harper said, and now he's talking about banking system not being banks not being permitted to operate in Canada, U.S. banks, that is. And so I think that this just increases people's frustration here, and I do think in a way brings them together against a common enemy.
Well, as we take our only break of the hour, Francois writes in to say, Francois is a dual citizen, says the damage is already done even if tariffs are not implemented. Canadians are already changing behavior and finding alternatives to American products, which will increase the trade deficit. It takes time to build trust, but no time to destroy trust. It has just been destroyed. A lot happening on this Monday. Let's take this only break of the hour, and we'll come back with more of your feedback as we talk about this tariff war on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from GreenSpark Solar, serving the greater Rochester and Finger Lakes regions for over 20 years. GreenSpark Solar is dedicated to helping people power their homes and businesses with local solar power and battery storage backup. More at greensparksolar.com.
This is Connections. Whether you're listening, whether you're watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel, great to have you on this Monday afternoon. Hello, first on the line to Kathy in Chilai. Hi, Kathy, go ahead.
Hey, Evan. My opinion, I guess, but I think that the whole tariff thing is a distraction. I think that, everybody's in outrage and uproar about it, and that's all anybody's talking about right now. And I think the real problem, what they were hiding, is that Elon Musk sent a bunch of Doge employees into the Treasury Department, OPM, and GSA over the weekend, and they installed hard drives on all the computers, locked civil servants out of those systems, and this morning they shut down U.S. aid. Now, I think they picked a program that was large, but a lot of Americans didn't know anything about it, and it doesn't affect most Americans. And it's a test case to see whether they can do it, whether Congress is going to react, and everybody's so distracted with the tariffs that a lot of people are not. And now that opens a lot of people up to blackmail, because all they have to do is say to senators, well, if you don't vote for our nominee or whatever bill we're putting in front of you, we're just going to shut down Social Security payments to all your constituents, or we're going to shut down some program that's important to you, because they have access to it all now, and they have sole control over all of it now.
Well, let me just jump in, Kathy, and I appreciate you directing our attention to that. That's something that we're going to talk about. I'm sure NPR continues to cover that, and you'll hear that. And I want to sort of agree with part of that, but also disagree with another part of that. And then I do want to talk to Dr. Badapial about how it's not tariffs are not just a distraction for what's going on with Doge, because Trump has telegraphed this for years. This is a big deal for him. I mean, we're going to see more tariffs. He says we're definitely going to see tariffs on Europe. We'll see more on Asian partners. We'll see more. So I don't think it's just meant to be a distraction, but I do think, not to go all Ezra Klein on you, but I do think that the speed of what is going on is meant to make it hard to focus on any one thing. And Steve Bannon has said that in interviews. That is part of why they do things the way they do things, because they don't think the American people or the American media can focus long enough to really key in on what's happening on one thing. Because today it's tariffs, tomorrow it's DOGE and it's U.S. aid. A few days from now it might be Ukraine, who knows? And that strategy is very effective. So I take your point that is very distracting. There's all these things happening, and you want our focus on what's going on with the Treasury, what's going on with the control of money, the fact that the richest man in the world has been given the keys to the financial castle of this country. That's a big story. But I don't think it means that tariffs are just meant to be a distraction. I mean, I think they are their own tool, and you're going to see more of them. But I take Kathy's point. I mean, those are all stories worth covering, Dr. Bottipiello.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right in pointing out that this is part of the strategy of Stephen Miller and company that, flood the zone with, 10, 15 things at the same
Flood
time.
the zone. Flood the zone. That's right. Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, the Steves. That's what they want to do. So we're trying to focus day by day, hour by hour on these specific subjects. But I hear you, Kathy. There's a lot to focus on. We're going to do our best here. And let me get Pat in Geneva. Hello, Pat. Go ahead.
Hi. I'd like to bring it to something a bit more personal. I remember during the Iran hostage crisis, everywhere you looked, you saw American and Canadian flags adjacent. There were bumper stickers that both flags were on the same bumper sticker. And I think younger people may not know about that. And I also, a little short story, a friend of mine lived on a farm in down near Cortland, New York. And it was a foggy morning, and she had a knock on her door, and she was frightened. And she opened the door, and there were two Canadian soldiers standing at her front door. And they had engine trouble, and they had put down in her field, which was sticking up out of the fog. And she gave them breakfast and so forth. They left when it cleared. And about a month later, they knocked on her door, and they brought her a gallon of maple syrup. Now, those pilots were shuttling Canadian helicopters, I think, to Lycoming Engine in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where they had their engines rebuilt. So that's just a little personal human interest story about the friendship we have.
Yeah, Pat, I mean, you're right. This relationship is deep and long, and it's important. And I appreciate your perspective. Gary writes to say something Trump does not realize about Canadians. They have always worried about our intention to conquer them. When one visits the Canada Museum of History, there is an exhibit devoted to the War of 1812. As one enters the exhibit, there is a sign that reads that the United States has tried to invade Canada 3 times. If any of those had been successful, Canada would not be the free country it is today. I wonder how many Americans realize that the invasion and forceful takeover of their country by the U.S. has always been in the back of Canada's mind. They will never acquiesce to being the 51st state, nor should they. That is from Gary. So Pat and Gary with some things. Let me turn to our Canadian guest there, Dr. Norm Friesen, professor of education living in Canada. What do you make of Pat and Gary's points there?
Well, I think that people's personal experiences play a big role. I think that a lot of Canadians have had personal experiences about going to the border, visiting people in the U.S., and Americans helping Americans or working with Americans up here in Canada. So I do think that there's in addition to an emotional dimension, there's also a personal dimension as well. I've lived in the U.S. in 2 different locations in my life, and I tell you, especially the farther south you go, the less that Canada sort of seems to be important and a very far away place.
I think that's fair, and I think Gary's point, Dr. Elia, is an interesting one. That he's drawing on a lot of history there to say, if Trump thinks somehow that this is a ploy that will create some kind of pathway to acquiring Canada, he's probably going to lose. Dr. Elia, do you want to elaborate there?
I was struck by J.D. Vance's tweet. I'm not sure if anybody saw it, about sparing him the sob story about Canada's our best friend. Implying that These examples that we've heard from the Prime Minister and in other media about the examples throughout history, where our two countries have fought side by side, have helped one another. Post 9/11, the story in Newfoundland, where hundreds of Americans were helped by those who basically took them in because the planes were grounded. These aren't stories that are being brought up necessarily strictly to develop some sense of feeling sorry for us and how could you ever ask us to be accountable for anything because we're friends. That's not the intent. The intent is that to highlighting that there's been an unspoken relationship, an unspoken kind of acknowledgement between our two countries that we are culturally, arguably closer than any two countries on the planet. A number of years, when the Ukraine war broke out, and seeing images of Ukrainian soldiers defending their country against Russia, I was at a campfire with a few friends of mine, and we all kind of joked that, well, what would happen if the U.S. ever invaded us? And our feeling at that time, we all kind of agreed that would we fight? Would we actually enlist and fight if the U.S. ever tried to take us over? And by and large, our opinion at that time was, and I'd probably just give it, probably not worth the loss of life. We basically live the same lives anyways, so be it. There's again, like I said before, there's a patriotism that's come up, and I'm not sure how you unring the bell, to be honest, because if Trump were to announce tomorrow tariffs are off, right, delaying a month, whatever that is, this relationship is forever changed because we can't rely on an element of stability, at least for the next 4 years. Goodness knows what the future brings, but it can't be relied upon. We have to, from a defense standpoint, from an economic standpoint, not to be dramatic, but the international world order has been upended overnight, seemingly, and I think Canadians are well aware of that right now. And whether the guest who brought up the caller who brought up is this a distraction for the Doge stuff, we really have no interest in this because it will be distraction after distraction for the next while, and we don't no Canadians particularly have an interest in being dragged into the daily impulses of the president. And again, I think you're going to see a definite steering away from our country, both diplomatically and economically, away from the U.S. And I think I don't think they're wrong in that.
Well, there's a number of questions from listeners about sort of tariffs 101. So let's do some of this. Michael says, it's been 50 years since I had economics classes. What are tariffs supposed to do? And did tariffs help cause the Great Depression? Dr. Badabial?
Yeah, so the first question first. What are tariffs supposed to do? Historically, in the United States, by which I mean 150 years ago or even longer, one key objective of tariffs was to raise government revenue. The second key objective of a tariff is to support, that is to protect, a domestic import competing sector. So for instance, if you're worried about steel from Japan or steel from China and you levy a tariff on Chinese or Japanese steel, the idea is to protect U.S. steel manufacturers. That's typically the key objective, along with revenue. But in the last 50 or so years, even the revenue-raising aspect of tariffs has largely been de-emphasized. And if you are a member of the so-called WTO, the World Trade Organization, generally speaking, the levying of tariffs is illegal except in a very narrow range of circumstances.
So on the subject of revenue, I've been trying to read far and wide to see what the best case for this tariff action is. So here's from the Wall Street Journal. They write the following, quote, "To serve as an economic advisor to Donald Trump, it helps to share his belief that tariffs can make the U.S. richer. Not many economists meet that criterion anymore. Stephen Mirren has made just that case. Mirren is the president-elect's choice to chair his Council of Economic Advisors, and he has written that the U.S. could be better off with average tariffs of around 20% and as high as 50% compared with the current 2%. He even agreed with President Trump that tariffs could provide enough revenue to provide free child care for Americans." So, end quote. That's from the Wall Street Journal. So Trump finds an economic advisor who is a contrarian, to say the least, Amit. But in the campaign, and I think during the debates, President Trump, then candidate Trump, was saying, "Well, yeah, we're gonna hammer the world with tariffs, and we're gonna use all that money. We might be able to cut taxes because of it. We'll be able to provide child care. We'll be able to pay for all these programs." And you seem to be saying that is not what tariffs do anymore.
That's right. And even if you think about it, let's be real concrete about this. Who actually pays the tariff? So let's focus on, just to give you an example, say textiles from China. Walmart, the importer, importing textiles or garments from China, it's the importer, Walmart, who's going to be paying the tariff, not China. Repeat, not China. So the idea that you're somehow hurting foreign countries directly with tariffs is just plain false.
And isn't Walmart then just going to raise prices?
Well, that's the next thing. So then Walmart has to decide, I have these extra costs to deal with, which I didn't have to thanks to Uncle Sam. What do I do with it? It may, if it thinks that the tariff's only going to last for a couple of weeks, eat the extra costs and not pass it on. But Walmart being a profit-maximizing entity, the chances are very low that it's simply going to eat these extra costs. The chances are they're going to be passed off as higher prices to consumers. So consumers in the United States shopping at Walmart are going to see price rises.
Alex wants to know, how effective can these tariffs be given how much Trump gave up the game with his test run on Colombia, make an insane demand, wait for concessions, and then declare victory no matter what changes? Colombia's economy is smaller than many states in the United States. What do you think?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So, for instance, the Californian economy is bigger than the economies of most countries in the world. So, attacking Colombia on a particular pretext and then claiming victory when the Colombian leader says, okay, well, we'll take some of our own citizens back, is really not a victory. We'll have to see what happens with China. China is a problem, like I've alluded to before. But if the Chinese were to capitulate like the Colombians have, then he could legitimately declare victory. But I don't see that happening anytime in the near future.
And Amit Charles writes in to say, well, the Canadian rock band Rush isn't touring anymore. Labatt Blue is made by Jenny. You can get maple syrup from the Adirondacks. And we have Tim Hortons and hockey teams here. Remind me why we need Canadian products?
Why we need Canadian products? Well, maybe the question should be posed in terms of a survey to residents of Wisconsin, Michigan, and other Midwestern states about why we need Canadian energy. If they could do without Canadian energy, you would think that they would have already done so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Charles being a little cheeky there, but Rush isn't the only export of Canada. And Dell writes in to say, rather than the 51st state, any chance Canada would take New York as its 11th province? I don't know, Dr. Friesen. Let me ask Norm. You want to take New York on? No, I think Dell's just kidding there. But Norm, what do you make when you hear President Trump and other Americans saying, well, what do we even get out of this? Do you know, Rush doesn't even tour anymore. Labatt Blue is made here. What do we get from Canada?
Well, I think it's really important not to focus on brands, but on commodities, because obviously that's what energy is, whether it's oil from Alberta or electricity from Quebec. And I read somewhere that 60% of the oil in the U.S. comes from Canada. So it's these kind of sort of invisible things that I think are really important. And I think that under these circumstances, if this continues, then they'll become quite visible, painfully visible, I think.
Dr. Elia, what do you think? Are you there, Mario?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. In terms of, are there actual, products that the Americans need?
Yeah.
If there weren't, then this wouldn't be an issue at all, because 25% tariffs on unneeded products wouldn't be affecting Americans. If they weren't needing our products, then we wouldn't be getting any value, any benefit from the exports. Clearly, there are a number of products that are crossing the border. Interesting. I'm very interested to see how this plays out. I talked about kind of the Made in Canada, push and the product in Canada push that we've seen here locally. I'm interested to see, do Americans have the attention span to actually reciprocate? And I don't know if they will necessarily, because of just the deluge of issue after issue after issue coming from the White House, and it being just so overwhelming, versus we kind of have one issue to focus on, right? This is so important to our economy that a protectionist stand at the grocery store, at the big box store, we can implement that. I won't say easily, but be able to sustain that and sustain that attention on that kind of endeavor. I don't know if that'll necessarily happen where Americans taking a Buy America stance, which has been floated for years, and there's a reason why people, including the president himself, will purchase products and have products from China. So the reason they do that is because it's less expensive. Will they actually be able to follow through on a Buy America strategy, given again all the other chaos going on in American politics right now?
No, that's an interesting point. And Dr. Badabial, the last 45 seconds are yours. What do you looking at next here that will inform what this trade policy is actually about, and what do you think we should be looking at?
Well, I think ideally we should be separating out our allies from the legitimate problems. You can't lump Canada and China into the same boat and throw in Mexico for good measure and then say, okay, well, they're all in the same problem. They pose similar problems for us. So you have to differentiate between them. Second thing is, one of the key things that you learn in economics is targeting. If the problem has something to do with trade, then yes, attack trade. But if the problem is something else, illegal immigration, fentanyl, whatever it is that has little or nothing to do with trade, then don't link issues when they ought not to be linked. And the final thing that I would say is that whatever else you do with trade policy, you have to treat China differently because it is an order of magnitude different beast than are either Mexico or Canada.
Well, it's been an insightful hour here. Dr. Amit Badabial is Distinguished Professor and the Arthur J. Gosnell Professor of Economics at RIT. Thank you for the expertise. Thank you for being here this hour.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Our thanks to Dr. Mario Elia joining us from Ontario. Mario, great having you back. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Evan.
Dr. Norm Friesen, a professor of education living in Canada. Norm, thank you for the insight as well.
Oh, you're welcome.
And listeners, got as many as your phone calls and emails. I know there's a lot of fire on this topic. We'll keep our eyes on it. But to Kathy's point, we'll keep our eyes on a lot of things here. We'll do our best, and we've got more connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the National Susan B. Anthony Museum and House, hosting the Susan B. Anthony Birthday Dinner Celebration with investment advisor and author Laurie Van Dusen as keynote speaker Wednesday, February 12th at the Convention Center. More at susanb.org.